Hello, incurable romantics. Prepare to travel back in time, to an era of glittering nights and shadowed alleys, where love was a dangerous gamble and fortunes were won and lost on the turn of a card. The year was 1925, and Chicago was a city of roaring contradictions. By day, it was a metropolis of steel and ambition, its streets choked with the clatter of Ford Model Ts and the clamor of commerce. By night, it transformed. A current of illicit energy pulsed beneath its respectable facade, spilling from the hidden doors of speakeasies in waves of jazz and illegal gin. It was a city that rewarded the bold and devoured the weak, and no man was bolder than Don Walter Moretti. From his penthouse study overlooking the glittering expanse of Lake Michigan, Walter ruled his empire. The room was a monument to his power, paneled in dark mahogany and furnished with leather chairs that smelled of old money and cigar smoke. A crystal decanter of amber whiskey sat on his desk, untouched. Tonight the liquor offered no comfort. A dry, rattling cough tore from his chest, a stark reminder of the one enemy he could not intimidate, bribe, or eliminate: time. He was 60, but the lines etched around his eyes and mouth spoke of a life lived with brutal intensity, a life that was now betraying him. The doctors, with their hushed tones and deferential glances, had given him a year, perhaps two. It was not enough. The Moretti name, forged in the fires of prohibition and built on fear, was a dynasty without a future. His legacy felt like a magnificent house built on sand, ready to be washed away by the next tide. He needed an heir, not just a son, for he had one of those. He needed a grandson, a new link in the chain, one strong enough to hold the empire together after he was gone. His gaze fell upon a framed photograph on his desk. A stern-faced woman with haunted eyes stared back, his late wife gone 20 years now, and beside it a newer photograph of his son Arthur. Walter's lip curled in a mixture of pride and profound disappointment. Arthur had the Moretti height and the dark, brooding looks, but he lacked the essential ingredient, the cold, hard flint in his soul. The boy had his mother's softness, her infuriating preoccupation with things like music and art. He played the piano in smoky jazz clubs, not for money but for the thrill of it, mingling with musicians and poets when he should have been learning how to break men. Walter pressed a discreet button on the underside of his desk. Moments later, the door opened silently and a man built like a bulldog stepped in. "Sir, fetch my son," Walter rasped, his voice thin but still laced with steel. "Tell him it is a matter of honor." The command was absolute. Within the hour, Arthur Moretti stood before his father. He was 28, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that couldn't quite disguise the restless energy of an artist trapped in a gangster's world. He smelled faintly of rain and sheet music, a stark contrast to the room's oppressive odor of smoke and power. "You summoned me, father," Arthur said. His voice was a low baritone, smoother than Walter's gravelly tone. "We have business to discuss," Walter said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. It was not an invitation, but a command. Arthur sat, his posture straight, his hands resting on his knees. He looked like a man awaiting a verdict. For a long moment, Walter simply studied him, his cold grey eyes searching for a flicker of the ruthless ambition he so desperately wished to see. He found only a weary resignation. "The Van Doren Empire is finished," Walter began, savoring the words like a vintage wine. "Clarence Van Doren, the great aristocrat, the man who looked down his nose at men like us, he is ruined. The stock market crashed last year, took what little he had left. He is a king sitting on a throne of debt." Arthur remained silent. He knew of the rivalry between his father and Clarence Van Doren. It was a legendary feud, a cornerstone of Chicago's high society and its underworld, a war that had raged since before Arthur was born. "He owes me," Walter continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He owes me a sum so vast he could not repay it in 10 lifetimes. He came to me, hat in hand, begging for mercy." A cruel smile touched Walter's thin lips. "I have decided to be merciful." Arthur's eyes narrowed. He knew his father's mercy. It was always a blade, sharpened and aimed at the heart. "You see, Arthur, a man like Van Doren has only one thing of value left, one asset that has not been mortgaged, sold, or gambled away." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air, thick and heavy. His daughter. A cold knot formed in Arthur's stomach. "Evelyn?" "Evelyn," Walter repeated, the name sounding foreign and clinical on his tongue. "By all accounts, she is a beauty. Spirited, intelligent, good breeding. The Van Doren line is an old one, if a foolish one. Their blood mixed with ours. It will create a powerful heir, a boy with my ambition and their pedigree. The horror of his father's plan dawned on Arthur, chilling him to the bone. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," Walter declared, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with a fanatical light, "that I have made Clarence Van Doren an offer. I will forgive his entire debt. I will erase it from the books, allow him to keep his hollow name and his empty house. In return, he will give his daughter's hand to you in marriage." Arthur shot to his feet, the chair scraping harshly against the polished floor. "No, absolutely not. Father, this is barbaric. You can't buy a woman." "I am not buying a woman," Walter roared, slamming his fist on the desk. The whiskey in the decanter trembled. "I am securing our future. I am forging a dynasty." "For you? For me?" Arthur's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You are sentencing an innocent woman to a life she does not want, with a man she does not know. You are turning a marriage into a business transaction, a cage." "Everything is a business transaction," Walter spat, rising slowly, his frail body radiating an aura of immense menace. "Life is a transaction. Power is a transaction. Do you think your mother and I married for love? It was an arrangement, a consolidation of territory. It is how our world works. This girl, Evelyn, will live a life of luxury she can no longer afford. She will be a Moretti. She will be the mother of the next Don. It is a far better fate than the poverty her father has destined her for." Arthur paced the room, his mind reeling. He thought of this unknown woman, Evelyn Van Doren. He imagined her spirit, her dreams, being crushed under the weight of his family's name. The name he himself often felt was a curse. "And what of her choice?" Arthur demanded, his voice strained. "Does she have no say in this?" "Her choice is to save her family from ruin or watch them descend into ignominy," Walter said coldly. "Her father will ensure she makes the correct one. He is a broken man, and broken men are practical. It is done, Arthur. The arrangements are being made. You will meet her. You will be charming. You will marry her. And you will give me a grandson." The finality in his father's voice was like the closing of a tomb. There was no room for argument, no space for appeal. The decision had been made in this suffocating room, a life traded for a ledger of debts. Arthur felt a wave of helpless rage wash over him, followed by a profound, chilling despair. He was as much a pawn in this game as Evelyn Van Doren. His father was not just buying a bride, he was shackling his own son to his monstrous ambition. "That is all," Walter said, sinking back into his chair, the exertion having drained him. He looked away from Arthur, his gaze returning to the city lights, already plotting the next move in his grand design. Arthur stood frozen for a moment, the unspoken words trapped in his throat. He wanted to scream, to smash the decanter, to renounce the name and the fortune and the entire bloody empire. But he knew it was useless. The loyalty, the duty, the fear. It was a cage as real as any iron bars. He turned and walked out of the study, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him with the sound of a cell door locking. He walked through the silent, opulent halls of the mansion, each painting and sculpture a testament to a wealth that felt like a poison. He needed air. He needed to escape the suffocating presence of his father's will. As he stepped out onto a cold stone balcony, the distant sound of a lone saxophone wafted up from a speakeasy hidden in the city's concrete canyons. It played a bluesy, melancholic tune, a song of heartbreak and longing. It was a lament for lost freedom, and Arthur felt as if it were being played just for him, and for a woman whose name was Evelyn, a woman he was now destined to destroy. While her future was being bartered away in a mahogany-paneled study, Evelyn Van Doren was living in the vibrant, breathless present. She was a creature of the new age, her hair a sleek dark bob that grazed her jawline, her spirit as effervescent as the champagne she sipped. Tonight, she was at the Green Mill, a jazz club that thrummed with the forbidden pulse of Chicago. The air, thick with perfume and rebellion, was a heady cocktail she drank in with every breath. A beaded fringe on her sapphire dress shimmied as she danced the Charleston, her feet a blur of motion, her laughter a bright, clear note above the wail of the saxophone. She was a flapper, yes, but not a frivolous one. Beneath the fashionable exterior was a mind as sharp as the crease in a new banknote. She danced with the energy of a woman who felt she had limitless time, yet she watched everything with the keen, observant eyes of a writer. In a small leather-bound journal hidden in her room, she chronicled the Roaring Twenties, its beauty, its hypocrisy, its desperate, glittering dance on the edge of a volcano. She dreamt of turning those observations into a novel, a story that would be truly hers. "Evelyn, you'll wear a hole in the floor," her friend Beatrice called out, her own face flushed with excitement. "Slow down before you take flight." Evelyn laughed, coming to a breathless halt beside their table. "Why should I? The world is finally spinning fast enough for me, Bee. We should never slow down." She felt a hand on her arm. It was Clarence Van Doren, her father. His presence in a place like this was unusual, and immediately the joyous atmosphere around Evelyn seemed to cool. He looked out of place in his formal suit. His shoulders sagged with a weariness that his proud posture could no longer conceal. "Evelyn, it is late. I've come to take you home," he said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the music's spell. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face, but she saw the deep, troubled look in his eyes, a look she had been seeing more and more often lately. She masked her concern with a playful sigh. "Already, father? The night is just getting started." "The night is over," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The ride home in the family's aging Packard was cloaked in a tense silence. The vibrant energy of the city faded behind them, replaced by the stately, sleeping mansions of their neighborhood. Their own home, once a beacon of old-world elegance, now felt different to Evelyn. It felt hollow. The grand staircase loomed in the dim light, and the portraits of her ancestors seemed to watch with pitying eyes. Clarence led her not to the drawing room, but to his study, a room she had rarely entered. It smelled of faded leather and extinguished hopes. He poured himself a brandy with a trembling hand, the amber liquid sloshing in the glass. "Father, what is it?" Evelyn asked, her patience finally fraying. "You look as though you've seen a ghost." He sank into his chair, the fine wool of his suit seeming to hang off his diminished frame. "Worse, my dear," he murmured, staring into his glass. "I have been dining with devils." He began to speak, and with every word, the world Evelyn knew began to dissolve. He spoke of failed investments, of market downturns, of debts that had grown like a cancer, hollowing out their fortune from the inside. He confessed that their wealth was a facade, their name the only thing of value they had left. He had been ruined for months, hiding the truth behind a mask of aristocratic pride. Evelyn listened, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She felt a surge of pity for this broken man, her father, who had tried to carry such a burden alone. "We will manage," she said, her voice soft but determined. "I can work. We can sell the house." "It is not enough," he cut in, his voice cracking. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were filled with a shame so profound it stole her breath. "There is only one debt that matters now, the one I owe to Walter Moretti." The name landed in the silent room like a stone. Moretti, the gangster, the new money tyrant who had clawed his way to the top of Chicago's food chain. His rivalry with her father was infamous, a clash of old aristocracy and new ruthless power. "He holds our entire fate in his hands, Evelyn," Clarence continued, his voice barely a whisper. "And he has offered a solution, a way to forgive the debt, a way for us to survive." "What solution?" she asked, a cold dread creeping up her spine. "What could a man like that possibly want from us?" Clarence couldn't meet her gaze. He stared at the portrait of his late wife, Evelyn's mother, as if seeking absolution. "He wants an alliance, a union of our families. He wants to secure his legacy." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. "A union," she repeated, her voice trembling. "What do you mean?" "He has a son," Clarence said, the words falling like weights from his tongue. "Arthur Moretti. The arrangement is that you will marry him." For a moment, Evelyn was certain she had misheard. The proposition was so medieval, so monstrous, that her mind refused to accept it. Then she saw the utter despair on her father's face and knew it was true. Laughter, sharp and hysterical, bubbled up from her chest. "Marry him? Marry a gangster's son to pay your debts? Is this some sort of grotesque joke?" "It is our only choice," he cried, slamming his fist on the desk. "He will destroy us, Evelyn. He will leave us with nothing." "This is not a request, it is a demand." "So you sell me," she shot back, her voice ringing with disbelief and betrayal. "You sell your own daughter like she's a piece of property to be traded. What about my life, my dreams? Do they mean nothing?" "Your dreams will die in poverty," he retorted, his face pale and slick with sweat. "With him you will have everything, wealth, security. He is demanding an heir, Evelyn, a child to carry on the Moretti name. Once that is done, your duty is fulfilled." The clinical coldness of his words struck her like a physical blow. An heir. She was not to be a wife, but a broodmare, a vessel to legitimize a gangster's bloodline. The room began to spin. The vibrant girl who had danced the Charleston just an hour before was gone, replaced by a terrified stranger in a world without rules or honor. A tense, formal meeting was arranged for the following evening. It was held in a private back room of a discreet supper club, a place where secrets were currency. Evelyn felt as if she were walking to her own execution. She wore a simple black dress, a stark contrast to the glittering sapphire gown of the night before. It felt like morning. The Morettis were already there. Don Walter was a vulture in a bespoke suit, his eyes cold and assessing as they raked over her. He appraised her as one might appraise a prize racehorse. But it was his son, Arthur, who captured her attention. He was handsome, she noted with a detached sense of irony, with dark, troubled eyes that seemed to hold a storm within them. He rose when she entered, a gesture of politeness that seemed utterly absurd given the circumstances. He was the gilded bars of her cage, impeccably polished and utterly inescapable. Arthur looked at Evelyn Van Doren and felt a profound sense of shame. She was more beautiful than he had imagined, but it was the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the proud, unbroken line of her jaw that struck him. This was no wilting flower. This was a woman of substance, and his father's plan was a desecration. He saw the flicker of fear she tried to hide behind a mask of defiance, and felt like a villain in a story he had never wanted to be a part of. He was not his father's son in that moment, but his father's tool. The conversation was a stilted, unbearable parody of civility. Don Walter spoke of mergers and futures, using business language to describe the sale of a human life. Clarence Van Doren sat stiffly, nodding at the appropriate times, his face a mask of misery. Arthur finally turned to Evelyn, his voice low. "My father mentioned you are a writer." Evelyn's head snapped up, surprised he would know such a thing, that he would even care. For a fleeting second she saw something in his eyes. Was it empathy? Pity? She quickly extinguished the thought. Pity was an insult. "I am many things, Mr. Moretti," she replied, her voice as cold and sharp as ice. "But tonight, it seems I am merely collateral." His gaze fell, the flicker of connection broken. He could not deny the truth of her words. The transaction was concluded without a single word from Evelyn. Don Walter laid out the final terms, the transfer of properties, the cancellation of debts. It was all contingent on one thing, the wedding. "Is it agreed, Van Doren?" Walter asked, his voice leaving no doubt as to the outcome. Evelyn watched her father. She saw the war in his eyes, the last dying ember of his pride fighting against the crushing weight of his failure. He looked at her, his expression a silent plea for a forgiveness she did not know how to give. Clarence Van Doren gave a single defeated nod, and just like that it was done. Her soul had been auctioned to the highest bidder. The jazz music filtering in from the main room, the sound that had always been the anthem of her freedom, now sounded like a funeral dirge for the life she was about to lose. The Moretti mansion was not a home. It was a fortress of wealth, a monument to a brutal victory. For Evelyn, it was a prison crafted from marble and velvet. Her arrival was a quiet, chilling affair. There was no celebration, no welcoming party. She was escorted through the grand foyer by a silent housekeeper named Mildred, a woman with eyes that had seen too much and a mouth that had learned to say too little. The air was cold, smelling of lemon polish and hothouse roses that offered beauty without warmth. It was the scent of a mausoleum. Her rooms, a lavish suite overlooking a manicured garden, were larger than the entire ground floor of her father's house. A walk-in closet was filled with new clothes, shimmering dresses, silk stockings, and rows of elegant shoes, all in her size. They were gifts, but they felt like a uniform. She was being dressed for a role she had not auditioned for, the role of Mrs. Arthur Moretti, the beautiful, valuable prize, displayed to prove that Don Walter could acquire anything or anyone he desired. The first days were a study in exquisite loneliness. She was a ghost in a palace, drifting through rooms filled with priceless art and heavy, ornate furniture. The staff treated her with a deferential distance, their politeness a wall she could not penetrate. Don Walter observed her from afar, his presence a constant, oppressive weight. He would watch her at the dinner table, his cold eyes appraising her, as if checking his investment for flaws. They rarely spoke. His silence was more intimidating than any threat. And Arthur. Arthur was the most haunting ghost of all. He was a phantom in his own home, moving through it with a quiet, restless energy. He avoided her. Their paths would cross in a long hallway or on the grand staircase, and he would offer a stiff nod, his dark eyes clouded with a guilt so profound it was almost a physical presence. He could not look at her for more than a second, as if her face were a mirror reflecting his own shame. He was her jailer and he hated his job. Evelyn, however, was not one to wilt. Betrayal had forged a core of steel within her. She would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. Instead, she explored her golden cage. She read every book in the vast two-story library, losing herself in worlds far from her own. She walked the gardens, the perfect geometry of the hedges and flower beds, a reflection of the rigid control that governed her new life. She was searching for a crack, a weakness, any sign of life in the sterile perfection of the Moretti dynasty. She found it one rainy afternoon. A storm had descended upon Chicago, lashing against the windows and wrapping the mansion in a grey gloom. The oppressive silence of the house was deeper than usual. Driven by a restless need for motion, Evelyn wandered into a wing of the mansion she had not yet explored. It was older, dustier, the furniture covered in white sheets like rows of sleeping ghosts. It was then that she heard it, a sound, soft and melancholic, weaving its way through the silent halls. It was music, a piano. The melody was complex and sorrowful, a cascade of notes that spoke of a deep, aching loneliness. It was a sound that did not belong in this house of cold ambition. It was a sound of pure, unfiltered soul. Following it, she found the source, a door, slightly ajar, leading to a small, forgotten parlor. Peeking through the crack, she saw him, Arthur. He was seated at an old upright piano, his back to the door. The dust sheets had been pulled away from this one piece of furniture. His shoulders were hunched, his focus entirely on the keys his fingers danced across. He was not playing a jawn. This was not the rollicking, rebellious music of the speakeasies. This was something classical, infused with the raw, improvisational edge of the blues. It was a confession set to music. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, hidden in the shadows, listening. Here, at this piano, Arthur Moretti was not the son of a gangster. He was not the man who had been forced upon her. He was an artist, his music a raw and vulnerable expression of the conflict warring within him. She heard his guilt in the mournful minor chords, his frustration in the sudden, crashing crescendos, and a flicker of desperate hope in the delicate, lingering notes. For the first time she saw the man, not the monster. She saw a fellow prisoner, trapped in the same cage, albeit one he had been born into. A strange, unwelcome flicker of empathy stirred within her. She quietly backed away, leaving him to his solitude, his secret. The discovery changed something fundamental in her perception of her fate. Her cage now had a mystery within it, and her captor had a soul. Emboldened, her curiosity piqued. Evelyn's explorations became more targeted. If Arthur had a secret life hidden in this house, what other secrets did the mansion hold? A few days later, she found herself in the attic, a vast space filled with the discarded history of the Moretti family. It smelled of cedar and thyme. Trunks and crates were stacked high, containing everything from old business ledgers to moth-eaten clothes. In a far corner, tucked away beneath a canvas tarp, was a heavy, leather-bound steamer trunk, its clasps rusted with age. It didn't look like the others. The initials on it were not WM for Walter Moretti, but a faded, elegant script she did not recognize. Prying open the stiff latches, she lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed linens, was a collection of keepsakes, a woman's things, a pair of delicate gloves, a silver-backed hairbrush, a book of poetry with pressed flowers between its pages, and beneath it all, a small, rosewood box. Her heart quickened as she opened it. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon and a single sepia-toned photograph. She picked up the photograph. It showed 3 people, young and smiling, posing by the lakefront. On the right was a shockingly young Walter Moretti, his face not yet hardened by cruelty, a possessive hand on the shoulder of a beautiful woman in the center. She had a radiant smile and the same dark, soulful eyes as Arthur, his mother. But it was the man on the left who made Evelyn's blood run cold. He was handsome, confident, and achingly familiar. It was her own father, Clarence Van Doren, looking at the woman with an expression of undisguised adoration. They were not rivals then. They were friends, or perhaps more than friends. Her hands trembling slightly, Evelyn untied the ribbon around the letters. The handwriting was a delicate, feminine script. She unfolded the top letter, her eyes scanning the faded ink. My dearest C, he grows more possessive by the day. The cage, however gilded, is still a cage. I think of our promise, of the life we spoke of, and it is the only thing that gives me strength. Do not forget me. I shall never forget you. Yours always, L.L. Lenora Moretti. Arthur's mother, writing to C, Clarence, her father. Evelyn sank back on her heels, the letter clutched in her hand. The air in the attic suddenly felt thin, heavy with the weight of a history she had never known. This was not a simple business rivalry. The hatred that had defined her life, that had led to her being sold and caged, was not born in a boardroom. It was born of something far more personal. It was born of love and of loss. She looked at the photograph again, at the three young people frozen in a moment of sunshine before the storm, her father, Arthur's mother, and the man who had destroyed them all. Downstairs, the mournful sound of the piano began to drift up through the floorboards. It was the same sad melody Arthur had played before, but now for Evelyn it had a new and terrifying meaning. It was not just his lament, it was the echo of a much older tragedy, and she was standing right in the middle of it. The knowledge of the letters burned in Evelyn's mind, a secret that reframed every interaction, every silence in the oppressive mansion. The photograph of her father and Arthur's mother, smiling under a long-forgotten sun, was seared into her memory. She could no longer see Arthur as simply the son of her family's enemy. He was the son of a woman whose heart had belonged to another. He was a living embodiment of the tragedy she was just beginning to uncover. His mournful music, once just a curiosity, now felt like a direct line to the past, an unconscious echo of his mother's sorrow. She could not ignore it. A few days after her discovery in the attic, the familiar, melancholic notes drifted through the house once more. This time Evelyn did not hesitate. She did not linger in the shadows. With a steadying breath, she walked to the forgotten parlor and pushed the door open. The music stopped abruptly with a discordant clang of keys. Arthur's head snapped up, his face a mask of shock and defensiveness, as if she had caught him in a profoundly intimate act. He started to rise, his hands hovering over the piano as if to shield it. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "I didn't mean to intrude." "This room is not used," he stammered, his usual cool composure completely gone. He looked like a boy caught with a forbidden diary. "It's the only room in this entire house that feels alive," she countered, stepping further inside. She ran a finger over the dusty lid of the grand piano. "The music you play, I've never heard it before. Is it your own?" He looked down at the black and white keys, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "They are just chords, fragments, nothing of consequence." "I disagree," Evelyn said, her gaze direct and unwavering. "They are full of consequence. They sound like a story without words." Her observation hung in the air between them, a recognition of the truth he tried so hard to conceal. He saw that she was not mocking him. There was no pity in her eyes, only a startling, unnerving understanding. He slowly sank back onto the piano bench. "My father, he does not approve of it," Arthur admitted, the confession costing him a visible effort. "He sees it as a weakness, a distraction from the family business." "My father sees my writing the same way," Evelyn found herself saying. "A foolish hobby for a woman who should be focused on making a suitable match." The bitter irony of her words was not lost on either of them. An unspoken truce was declared in that dusty room. A fragile bridge was built across the chasm of their family's hatred. The parlor became their sanctuary, a neutral territory where they were not a Moretti and a Van Doren, but simply Arthur and Evelyn. He began to play for her. At first he was hesitant, but her quiet, attentive presence seemed to unlock something within him. He played the passionate, sorrowful compositions that were his own, and he played the wild, syncopated rhythms of the jazz he loved, the music of rebellion and freedom. In his music, Evelyn heard all the words he could not say, his resentment of his father, his loneliness, his guilt over her situation. In return, she shared her secret with him. One evening, clutching her leather-bound journal to her chest, she read him a passage she had written about the frenetic, desperate energy of a flapper dancing the Charleston. He listened, captivated, not just by her elegant prose, but by the sharp, insightful way she saw the world. He heard her yearning for a life of her own, her frustration with the gilded cage her gender and social class had built around her. "You see people," he said quietly when she finished. "You see what's beneath the surface." "So do you," she replied. "You just use notes instead of words." In this shared solitude, an intimacy grew that was more profound and dangerous than either of them could have anticipated. They talked for hours, their conversations weaving from books to music, to the suffocating expectations that had shaped their lives. She discovered a sharp wit beneath his brooding exterior, and he found a fierce strength and vulnerability beneath her defiant pride. The attraction that had been a spark of morbid curiosity now smoldered, a low, constant heat. He started looking for her, and she started listening for the sound of his piano. One night, another storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil in their hearts. They were in the parlor, the only light coming from a single lamp that cast long shadows across the room. Arthur was playing a soft, searching melody, and Evelyn was sitting on a nearby ottoman, watching his hands move over the keys. The air was thick with unspoken feelings, charged with the electricity of the storm. The music faded into silence. He turned on the bench to look at her, and his eyes were dark with an emotion she could no longer ignore. It was a longing that mirrored her own. "Evelyn," he whispered, her name a sound of both reverence and pain. He didn't move towards her, but she felt drawn by an invisible force. She rose and walked to the piano. She stood before him, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. She raised a hand, her fingers hesitating for a moment before gently touching his cheek. His skin was warm. He closed his eyes at her touch, a shudder running through him, and then all pretense fell away. He leaned in, his hand coming up to cup the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her short hair. He pulled her down to him, and their lips met. The kiss was not gentle. It was a release of all the pent-up loneliness, guilt, and forbidden desire that had been building between them for weeks. It was desperate and hungry, a clash of two worlds in a single, searing moment. Evelyn's hands went to his shoulders, gripping him as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning universe. She tasted whiskey and sorrow on his lips, and she met his raw passion with her own. This was wrong, impossible, a betrayal of, she wasn't even sure what. But in that moment it felt like the only true thing that had happened since she'd entered this house. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, their faces inches apart. The reality of what they had just done crashed down on them. They had crossed a line. The fragile peace of their sanctuary was shattered. "Arthur," she said, her voice trembling. "We can't." "I know," he breathed, his forehead resting against hers. But he made no move to pull away. The kiss had changed everything. It had made the situation unbearable. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a prisoner falling for her jailer. Terrified by the intensity of her own feelings, she knew she could not continue living this lie. She needed the truth, all of it. "Tell me," she demanded, pulling back to look him in the eye, her resolve hardening. "Tell me why. Not the business rivalry, not the stories they tell in the newspapers. Tell me the real reason your father hates mine so much. I deserve to know what this is all truly about." Arthur's face shuttered. The warmth from the kiss vanished, replaced by the familiar storm in his eyes. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the rain-streaked glass. "It is an old wound," he said, his back to her. "One he is never allowed to heal." "What wound?" she pressed, following him. "You owe me this, Arthur. After what your family has done to me. You owe me the truth." He turned to face her, his expression grim, his face aged by the weight of the story he was about to tell. "It's about my mother," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, as if he were reciting a catechism learned long ago. "She died when I was a boy. A tragic accident. A fall from a horse." He paused, and Evelyn held her breath, the letters she found in the attic feeling like cold stones in her memory. "My father," Arthur continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "has always held one man responsible. He says your father was there that day, that they argued, that he spooked the horse. He believes with every fibre of his being that Clarence Van Doren murdered his wife." The words fell into the silent parlour like shards of glass. "He believes that Clarence Van Doren murdered his wife." Arthur delivered the accusation with the dead weight of a truth he had carried his entire life. For him it was fact. It was the foundation of his father's grief, the justification for his relentless vengeance, the original sin that stained the Van Doren name. For Evelyn, it was a story that didn't fit. It was a dissonant chord in a melody she was just beginning to understand. The man in the photograph, the young Clarence who looked at Lenora Moretti with such open-hearted love, was not a murderer. And the woman who wrote of a gilded cage and a secret promise was not the victim of a simple riding accident. The story her father had always told her, that Lenora's death was a terrible, tragic accident that had broken him and inexplicably turned his friend Walter into a bitter enemy, suddenly felt closer to the truth than the monstrous tale Arthur had just relayed. "That's a lie," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. It was not a denial born of loyalty, but of instinct. A shadow of disappointment crossed Arthur's face. It's the truth I was raised with. Truths can be manufactured, Arthur, she said, her mind racing, fitting the pieces together. Walter's cruelty, his obsession with destroying her father, his need to possess her as the ultimate prize. It was not the grief of a bereaved husband. It was the consuming, pathological jealousy of a scorned one. People build empires on lies. He turned away from her, the conversation over in his mind. He had given her his truth, and she had rejected it. The fragile bridge between them crumbled into dust. The kiss they had shared now felt like a bitter memory, a moment of weakness that had only served to highlight the impassable gulf between their worlds. In the days that followed, an icy coldness descended between them, far worse than the initial awkwardness of her arrival. The sanctuary of the music room was abandoned. The house was once again a silent, opulent prison, but Evelyn was no longer a passive inmate. She was a woman with a mission. She had to find the proof, the undeniable evidence that would shatter the lie that had defined all their lives. She began in the library, a vast, cathedral-like room where the official histories were kept. Under the guise of searching for a novel, she spent hours poring over old bound volumes of the Chicago Tribune from the year of Lenora's death. She found the article eventually. It was a small column on a back page, tucked away between stock reports and society gossip. "Tragic accident claims society dame," the headline read. The report was brief, clinical. Lenora Moretti, wife of rising industrialist Walter Moretti, had died from a fall during a morning ride on her country estate. The article mentioned that a family friend, Mr. Clarence Van Doren, had been present and was reportedly distraught and assisting with the initial investigation. The death was officially ruled an accident by the local coroner. It was too neat, too simple. A woman of Lenora's standing, the wife of a man as powerful as Walter, would surely have warranted more than a minor column. It felt less like a report and more like a carefully managed press release designed to bury a story, not tell it. Her investigation had hit a wall of carefully constructed fiction. She needed a key, someone who had lived through the official story and knew its secrets. She thought of the housekeeper, Mildred. The woman was a fixture in the house, her loyalty seemingly to the building itself rather than to its master. She had been there when Lenora was alive. Evelyn had seen a flicker of warmth in the older woman's eyes when she spoke of Arthur's mother. Evelyn found Mildred in the conservatory, carefully tending to a collection of orchids. "Mildred," Evelyn began, her tone gentle, "I hope you don't mind me asking. I never see any portraits of Arthur's mother in the main house. I was wondering what she was like." Mildred continued her work, snipping a dead leaf with meticulous care. "Mrs. Lenora was like one of these orchids," she said, her voice low and even. "A rare, beautiful thing, not meant for this cold, draughty house." "She sounds wonderful," Evelyn prodded. "It must have been a terrible shock when she died." The housekeeper paused, her back still to Evelyn. "Some shocks are not a single jolt, miss. Some go on echoing for a lifetime." She turned then, her gaze sharp and penetrating, as if searching Evelyn's soul. "Why do you ask about the past? The master of this house does not like it disturbed." "Because the past is not past," Evelyn said, deciding to take a risk. "It is what brought me here. I need to understand it." Seeing a flicker of something, perhaps trust, perhaps a shared disdain for the Don, in Evelyn's eyes, Mildred made a decision. The master, he cleared out most of her things, but he did not know his wife as well as he thought. He did not know all her hiding places. Later that night, when the house was deep in slumber, Mildred came to Evelyn's room. With a silent gesture, she led her not to the attic, but to the grand master bedroom suite that had once been Lenora's, a wing Walter had sealed off after her death. Using an old ornate key, Mildred unlocked the door. The air inside was still and cold, thick with the scent of dust and faded perfume. Mildred walked to an enormous carved rosewood wardrobe and ran her hand along the inside paneling. She pressed a discreet spot in the woodwork, and a false panel clicked open, revealing a hidden, velvet-lined compartment. Inside lay a single, leather-bound book, a diary. "He thought he had destroyed everything," Mildred whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But she gave this to me for safekeeping, days before she died. She was afraid. I think you have a right to know why." She placed the diary in Evelyn's hands and slipped away, a ghost returning to the shadows. Back in her room, with her door locked, Evelyn opened the diary. The same elegant script from the letters filled the pages. Her hands trembled as she read, devouring 20 years of secrets in a few frantic hours. The early entries were filled with a young girl's love for sea, her Clarence. She wrote of their shared dreams, of a life they planned to live together, away from the rigid expectations of their families. Then the tone shifted to one of despair. She wrote of her family's financial trouble and the pressure to marry the ambitious, wealthy Walter Moretti. October 1904. Father says it is my duty. Walter is a good match, a powerful man who can save us. He does not understand that my heart is not a commodity to be traded. When I told C, I saw his heart break, and a piece of my own shattered with it. Walter looks at me as if I am a prize he has won. C looked at me as if I were the sun. The later entries became darker, chronicling a life of emotional imprisonment. She wrote of Walter's suffocating jealousy, his rages, his obsession with controlling her every move. She wrote of her only joy, her son Arthur, a boy in whom she saw her own gentle spirit. Then, Evelyn found the final entries, written in the week leading up to her death. May 12, 1905. I saw C today, in secret. The years have not dimmed it, not for a moment. He begged me to leave Walter, to come away with him. He said we could escape, start anew. For the first time in years, I feel a flicker of hope. I live in terror, but for the first time, I feel hope. May 16, 1905. I have made my decision. I will go. I will take Arthur. We will meet Clarence at the old oak by the river tomorrow. I must tell Walter tonight that I am leaving him. It is the only honorable way. God grant me courage. The final entry was written in a frantic, slanted script. The ink was smudged, as if by tears or a trembling hand. May 17th, 1905. He knows, I told him, the look in his eyes. I have never seen such hatred. It was not grief, it was rage. He said he would rather see me dead than with another. He said the Moretti name would not suffer such humiliation. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. Clarence is waiting. I must get out, I must... The sentence ended there, a frantic trailing line of ink. Evelyn stared at the page, her blood running cold. It wasn't proof of a physical act, but it was proof of everything else. Proof of motive, proof of intent. Lenora hadn't died in an accident while arguing with Clarence. She had died trying to escape to him, after being threatened by her monstrous husband. Walter Moretti hadn't lost a wife. He had silenced her. And then he had twisted his own crime into a weapon of vengeance, using it to slowly, methodically destroy the man she had truly loved, culminating in this final, cruel act, the claiming of that man's daughter. The diary lay open in her lap, a testament to a 20-year-old crime. The truth was a loaded gun, and it was now in her hands. The question was no longer what had happened, but what she was going to do about it. The weight of the diary on Evelyn's lap felt heavier than a tombstone. For the rest of the night she sat in the silent room, the damning words of Lenora Moretti burning in her mind. Sleep was an impossibility. The carefully constructed world of her captivity had been demolished, revealing a foundation of lies, obsession, and murder. Walter Moretti was not just a cruel man. He was a monster who had orchestrated a 20-year symphony of revenge for a crime he himself had committed. She looked at her reflection in the dark window pane. The frightened girl who had been sold to save her family was gone. In her place was a woman armed with a devastating truth, a truth that could either set them all free or bring the entire corrupt edifice crashing down upon their heads. There was no turning back. The next day was the eve of the wedding. A morbid sense of finality hung in the air. Tailors and florists moved through the house like spectres, making preparations for a ceremony that felt more like a state funeral. Evelyn moved through the motions in a daze, her mind a whirlwind of strategy and fear. She knew she could not confront Walter alone. He would deny everything, destroy the diary, and silence her as he had silenced Lenora. The truth would die with her. She needed Arthur. He had to be the one to see it, to believe it. He was the key. He was Walter's son, the focus of his entire legacy, and the only person whose defection could truly break him. She found him in the library, staring out the large bay window at the gray, unforgiving Chicago sky. He looked haggard, a man being led to his own execution. The icy distance between them had been absolute since their last conversation, but she could see the torment in his posture, the deep conflict in his soul. "Arthur," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the terror that churned in her stomach. He turned, his expression guarded. "The tailors are looking for you. For the final fitting. The wedding is not going to happen," she stated, not as a hope but as a fact. A bitter, weary smile touched his lips. "I admire your optimism, Evelyn, but my father's will is not something that can be wished away. It is not a wish. It is a decision." She walked towards him, holding Lenora's diary in her hands. She held it out to him. "This belonged to your mother." He stared at the leather-bound book, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He made no move to take it. "What is it?" "It's her diary," Evelyn said softly. "Her last entries. I think you need to read them. I think you need to read the truth about how she died, written in her own hand." He recoiled, as if she had offered him a venomous snake. "I know how she died, and I will not have you use her memory to try and escape this." The accusation stung, but she held her ground. "I am not trying to escape, Arthur. I am trying to liberate us both. Your father has built your entire life, his entire hatred for mine, on a lie. A monstrous lie that he created to hide his own unforgivable sin. You are his son. You have his eyes. Look at this book and tell me you don't feel the truth in it." Her conviction, the raw certainty in her voice, finally broke through his defenses. His gaze dropped to the diary. With a trembling hand, he took it. He opened it to the pages she had marked, his eyes scanning the frantic final entry. Evelyn watched him, her heart pounding. She saw the color drain from his face. She saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped the book. She saw the slow, dawning horror in his eyes as the carefully constructed narrative of his life disintegrated, word by devastating word. He read it once, then again, his breath catching in his throat. The foundation of his world, his father's righteous grief, the villainy of the Van Dorens, his own filial duty, cracked and then shattered into a million pieces. He told me," Arthur whispered, his voice choked with disbelief. "All my life he told me he loved her more than anything, that her death destroyed him. He loved possessing her," Evelyn corrected gently, "and when he couldn't have her, he destroyed her, and then he spent the next 20 years destroying the man she truly loved. My father." Arthur looked up from the diary, his eyes meeting hers. The storm within them had finally broken. What remained was a landscape of raw pain and devastating clarity. He was no longer the son of a grieving patriarch. He was the son of a murderer. "What do we do?" he asked, the question a plea. "We expose him," she said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "Tonight, he's hosting a dinner for his business partners, a celebration of the merger between our families. My father will be there. We will confront him in front of everyone. He can't escape the truth when it's spoken in a room full of witnesses." That evening, the grand dining room of the Moretti mansion glittered with stolen light. Crystal glasses and polished silver shone under the light of a massive chandelier. Don Walter Moretti sat at the head of the table, a king upon his throne, flanked by his most powerful and dangerous associates. He was in his element, expansive and triumphant. Clarence Van Doren sat near the middle of the table, a pale, diminished figure, a living trophy of Walter's victory. The dinner was nearing its end when Arthur and Evelyn entered, standing together in the grand archway. A hush fell over the room. They were supposed to be getting ready for the next day's nuptials, not interrupting this crucial display of power. "Arthur, Evelyn," Walter said, his voice dangerously soft. "What is the meaning of this?" "We have something to discuss, Father," Arthur said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that made every man at the table sit up straighter. "Something that concerns everyone here, as it goes to the heart of what a Moretti's word is worth." He and Evelyn walked to the head of the table, stopping on either side of Walter. Arthur placed his mother's diary on the white linen tablecloth. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. "What is this nonsense?" Walter snarled, his eyes darting from Arthur to Evelyn, sensing the shift in power. "This," Evelyn said, her voice clear and strong, "is the diary of Lenora Moretti, your late wife." A flicker of genuine shock, then fear, crossed Walter's face. He looked at the book as if it were a ghost risen from the grave. "She writes of many things," Arthur continued, his cold gaze fixed on his father. "She writes of her love for another man." He glanced at Clarence Van Doren, who looked up, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning comprehension. "A man you called your friend. She writes of her plan to leave you, to take me with her." The men at the table began to murmur, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This was not business. This was a family's sacred laundry, being aired in the most brutal fashion. And in her final entry, Evelyn's voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Written on the day she died, she writes of telling you her plan. She writes of your rage. She writes, and I quote, 'He said he would rather see me dead than with another.'" A collective gasp went through the room. Clarence Van Doren stared at Walter, 20 years of confusion and undeserved guilt finally coalescing into horrified understanding. "Lies!" Walter roared, slamming his fist on the table, the silverware rattling. He lunged for the diary, but Arthur was faster, snatching it away. "This is a forgery, a trick by this bankrupt fool and his scheming daughter." "Is it?" Arthur challenged, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Then why did you seal off her rooms? Why did you burn every photograph, every letter, every trace of her existence? You weren't erasing her memory, Father. You were erasing your crime." The accusation hung in the glittering air, undeniable and absolute. The truth, finally spoken, sucked all the oxygen from the room. Walter Moretti, the invincible Don, was exposed, not as a grieving husband, but as a jealous tyrant, not as a powerful patriarch, but as a petty, obsessive murderer. The foundation of his power, fear built on a myth of righteous vengeance, was gone. He looked around the table, at the faces of his associates, and saw not loyalty, but shifting eyes and calculating glances. He saw the end of his reign in their expressions. He turned to Arthur, his son, his heir, and saw not devotion, but a cold, righteous judgment that was his final undoing. A terrible gurgling sound escaped Walter's throat. His face, already pale, turned a mottled purple. His eyes widened in a mixture of rage and terror. He clutched at his chest, his impeccably tailored suit suddenly a straitjacket. The carefully constructed facade of his body, the last fortress of his will, was giving way. He collapsed forward, scattering glasses and plates, his body hitting the table with a sickening thud. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. Then, chaos erupted. But Arthur and Evelyn did not move. They stood amidst the pandemonium, looking down at the broken form of the man who had imprisoned them both. The monster was slain, brought down not by a bullet or a knife, but by the weight of his own suffocating secrets. The cage had fallen. The chaos receded as quickly as it had erupted, leaving behind a silence more profound and heavy than any before it. The doctor, summoned in a flurry of panic, pronounced Don Walter Moretti dead before he was ever moved from the floor. His associates, men who had built their fortunes on calculated risks, recognized a collapsing dynasty when they saw one. They offered clipped, insincere condolences to Arthur and melted away into the Chicago night, their minds already churning with how to carve up the remnants of the Moretti empire. By dawn, the mansion was still. The body was gone. The glittering dining room had been cleared, its scene of judgment erased by the silent, efficient staff. All that remained was the ghost of a truth that could no longer be unspoken. Evelyn found Arthur in the music room, standing before the dusty piano. He wasn't playing. He was just looking at the keys, his reflection a faint, distorted image on the polished black wood. The victory of the previous night had not brought elation, only a heavy, somber release. "He's gone," Arthur said, his voice flat. He didn't have to specify who. All that power, all that rage, it just stopped. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes clear of the storm for the first time, but filled with a deep, soul-wearying exhaustion. "I should feel something more. Triumph, perhaps. Or even grief. Instead, I just feel quiet." "You feel free," she said softly, walking to stand beside him. "It's a quiet sound at first. You have to get used to it." Later that morning, the remnants of his father's world came to him. Rocco, his father's oldest and most ruthless lieutenant, came to the study. He expected a transfer of power, a son stepping into his father's shoes, a continuation of the brutal business. "The men are waiting for your orders, Don Moretti," Rocco said. The title meant as both a coronation and a test. Arthur looked at the man, at the desk where his father had sealed Evelyn's fate, at the empire of fear that was now his for the taking, and he felt nothing but revulsion. "There is no Don Moretti," he said, his voice calm but absolute. "The Moretti Empire died last night. Whatever is left, you and the others can fight over the scraps. I am finished with it." Rocco's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed with a predator's understanding. He saw weakness, but Arthur saw liberation. Rocco left without another word, already plotting his ascent. Arthur's final act as a Moretti was to go to Clarence Van Doren. He found him in the study of his own home, a man who seemed to have aged a decade and then grown 10 years younger in the span of a single night. "The debt is erased," Arthur said simply, handing him a ledger and a box of promissory notes from his father's safe. "It was never about money. It was paid for with a life long ago. There is nothing left to owe." Clarence looked at the young man before him, the son of the woman he had loved and the man who had destroyed him, He saw none of Walter's cruelty in Arthur's face, only Lenora's gentle strength. "Your mother," Clarence said, his voice thick with emotion. "She would be so proud of you." It was the only absolution Arthur needed. With the ghosts of the past finally laid to rest, only the future remained. An empty, unwritten page. He returned to the mansion to find Evelyn packing a small suitcase in her room. The dozens of dresses and shoes provided for her lay untouched in the closet. She was packing the simple clothes she had arrived with. "You're free, Evelyn," Arthur said, standing in the doorway. "Truly free. The house, what's left of the money. I will ensure you and your father are taken care of." She turned from her suitcase, her expression unreadable. "And what about you? What will you do?" "I'm leaving Chicago," he said. "This city is my father's monument. I can't breathe here anymore. I thought perhaps New Orleans, a city that lives and breathes music. I can just be a man who plays the piano there, not a Moretti." He took a step closer, his heart a frantic, uncertain rhythm in his chest. "I have no right to ask you for anything. You have your own life to reclaim, your own stories to write. You deserve a future that has nothing to do with the name Moretti." He paused, his gaze intense and vulnerable. "But I have to ask anyway. Come with me, Evelyn." She looked at him, at this man who had been her captor, her confidant, her unexpected ally, the object of a dangerous and forbidden kiss. He wasn't offering her a cage of wealth or a life of duty. He was offering her an unknown road, a shared escape, a blank page. "And be what?" she asked softly. "Be whoever you want to be," he answered, his voice raw with sincerity. "Write your book, see the world, just be with me. We can compose a new life, our own score." The Grand Central Station was a cathedral of departures, filled with the hiss of steam and the cries of goodbyes and hellos. Arthur stood on the platform beside the train bound for the south, a single suitcase at his feet. He had waited until the last possible moment, a desperate hope warring with the rational certainty that she would not come. Why would she? She was finally free to return to her own life, to her friends, to the world she had lost. The final call for boarding echoed through the station. His shoulders sagged. He turned to board the train alone. "Arthur!" He spun around. She was there, hurrying through the dispersing crowd, a small suitcase in her hand, and a brilliant, breathless smile on her face. Her sleek bob was slightly windswept, and her eyes were brighter than any ballroom chandelier. He met her halfway, his hands finding hers. They didn't need to say anything. The shared smile, the grip of their hands, said it all. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," he breathed, relief washing over him. "What?" she said, a playful glint in her eye as the train's whistle blew. "And missed the final chapter. Our story is only just beginning, Mr. Moretti, and I intend to be the one who writes it." He laughed, a true unburdened sound. He led her onto the train, and as it slowly pulled away from the platform, they stood by the window, watching the smoke-stained concrete canyons of Chicago recede into the distance. They left behind the ghosts and the gilded cages, the bitter debts and the blood-soaked fortunes. They were heading south, towards an uncertain future, armed with nothing but a shared truth and the hope of a new and beautiful melody. The heaviest chains are not forged from steel, but from lies passed down through generations. True freedom is not the absence of walls, but the courage to tear them down with the truth, allowing love to write a new future on the blank pages of the past. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more romances.